I just want to welcome and say good morning to all of you. My name is David Miles. I'm a docent and chair of the guest lecture series at the San Diego Museum of Art. We're located on unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation, the original people of the San Diego region. And I want to thank you again for joining us today. It's your support through participation and contributions of your time, your talent, your treasure that make these community events possible. This guest lecture series is hosted by our museum's docent council, and it's just really one part of our mission to engage all people and cultivate their interest in and understanding about the power of art in our lives. I want to do a special thank you here to the folks who've been really important for your committed support. All of you attending, certainly, museum staff who really helped us promote this, and the docent community, many of whom you're seeing here on the screen this morning. A special thank you to Dr. James Grebel, the museum's educator, mentor, and guide for docents at SDMA.
No. No. This is my first trip on my own. Yeah.
Meet everyone. There we go. And it's great to stay muted throughout this. Let's see. So very special thanks to three people. Bea Barraza, chair of the Docent Council, for her leadership. Mary Grillo, who I think may not be able to make it today, unfortunately, but who's been my partner and who honestly has done the lion's share of planning and execution to create this year's guest lecture season. And a special thanks today to Katie Bentz, who's going to be leading the question and answer session that will follow today's talk. I want to just share with you a slide to ask you to join us for the next month to hear from the museum's own Dr. Michael Brown, who'll be talking about a new collection that we have. Oops, am I showing you my notes or my screen? Here we go. He's going to be sharing with us the latest addition to our collection, a complete collection of prints by Mariano Fortuny, a 19th century Spanish artist, often compared to Goya, I believe. We're still learning about Mr. Fortuny. And it should be a very interesting conversation with Dr. Brown. That'll be on Friday, November 19th. But this is just one of the many events going on practically every day at the San Diego Museum of Art. Learn about them. You can learn about them at SDMART, San Diego Museum of Art, sdmart.org, and click on the green "What's Going On," either button or banner, depending on your device. So let's get going with today's guest speaker, Cesáreo Moreno. It's a great pleasure to have him here today. He's joining us from the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago, Illinois. Cesáreo joined the museum nearly 30 years ago and is today the visual arts director and chief curator of the museum. In addition to creating numerous exhibitions for the National Museum of Mexican Art, he's curated exhibitions at the El Paso Museum of Art, the Smithsonian Latino Center, and the National Hispanic Cultural Center. Some key exhibitions that he has curated will tell you something about his interests, including The House on Mango Street from 2016, A Declaration of Immigration, and the African Presence in Mexico from Yanga to the Present. And of course, he's also curated 14 of the annual Day of the Dead exhibitions at their museum. So without further ado, please help me welcoming Cesáreo Moreno, who'll speak on Dia de Muertos, 1987 to 2021, how an annual exhibition unites community and museum. Cesáreo?
Thank you. I think the first place that I need to sort of explain or quickly touch upon is sort of where our museum comes from, right? It'll shed a lot of light on why we do things the way we do. So the museum was founded in 1982, but we opened our doors, so we didn't have a museum until 1987. So in 1987, it was a group of Chicago public school educators who decided that they needed to create something for the community that was about them. In other words, these teachers in CPS saw the student body as being 24-25% of Mexican ancestry, but there was absolutely nothing in the curriculum regarding Mexico or their cultural history. So they decided that they would do some research, find out what's involved in opening a museum. And so they went around the country and tried to get information. Again, I want to emphasize, these are teachers, not art teachers or art history teachers. They were math teachers, English teachers, history teachers. And so their knowledge of fine art really was pretty basic. One of the things that they were told was, do not try to open a museum in a working class, blue collar neighborhood. You need to go where the disposable income is and where the tourist dollars come in. The teachers did not pay attention, and they opened the museum in the Pilsen neighborhood, which was in the 80s, all Mexican. It was a Mexican neighborhood. Many people from Mexico who did not go to museums when they were back in their own hometowns. So they were not museum goers. They were blue collar working class families. And the other thing that the museum did, which was not too, it wasn't too risky back then, or uncommon, I should say, is the museum was free. There was no charge to walk in. Back then, I think almost every museum in Chicago was. Today, we are one of the only free museums left in the city. And that makes a really big difference for my community, whether it's, teenagers on the weekend who wander into the museum because it's free, or whether it's large families where, if they had to pay a fee, mom and dad probably would exclude a trip to the museum. So anyhow, it remains free, it remains bilingual, and it remains a source of education. We use the artwork to teach about the culture and the history. And with that, I will share my screen and we can begin the conversation about the annual Day of the Dead exhibition. So here we have the museum. And that's the new entrance since 2001, when we expanded and built environmental controlled and security galleries, something that before that we did not have, or they were retrofitted, I should say. And so the museum in Pilsen, since day one, the very first exhibit that they organized in 1987, was a small exhibition of Day of the Dead. And since then, whoops, hold on, put it on here. And since then, we have had many opportunities, and I do mean this in all sincerity, we have had many opportunities to make mistakes over the years. And I just want to say that if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not trying hard enough, and you're definitely not learning. So I do see the value in experimenting and making mistakes. And as you can see here, since 1987, we have had many opportunities to learn how to connect community with the museum through this annual exhibit. I'm not going to go into the history of Day of the Dead, but I do want to just touch on a few key points, which is that death and the calavera, the skull form, was an important symbol since ancient Mexico. In Mesoamerica, it was a symbol of life just as much as it was a symbol of death, right? So that's one of the key takeaways there, that a skeleton or a skull does not only mean death, it also has an implication of life, because of the cycle of life and the renewal of life. It's a very profound idea or cosmic concept from ancient indigenous. Of course, with the Spanish arrival, from Cortes and whatnot. The Catholic religion was brought in. And of course, a lot of the iconography in the Catholic Church also revolves around death and sacrifice, and, you know, about the next life or heaven. Day of the Dead, of course, is focused on November 1st and November 2nd. Actually, in some towns, it begins on October 30th and it goes all the way to November 3rd. But we won't go into those details. November 1st and 2nd, All Souls Day, All Saints Day. Obviously, All Hallows Eve or Halloween also falls around that same time period. And so sometimes people mistakenly think that Day of the Dead is Mexican Halloween, when in fact it is not. It is far from Halloween. And I've got to say, I love Halloween. I've always loved Halloween. When I was a kid, when I was in college, and now that I'm a father, you know, Halloween has always been a very fun time. But Day of the Dead is very different. It's a completely different kind of celebration. And you can see at the bottom there, I've got a few images of the souls in purgatory. That's kind of like the main idea behind All Souls Day, right? All Souls Day in the Catholic Church, in the Catholic tradition, is a day that we pray for those people who are in purgatory. And it's only through prayers by those of us here on earth that they can get out of those purifying flames and make their way eventually to heaven. So purgatory is sort of this in-between space. It's a I guess a rest stop, although it doesn't look very very relaxing. It's a rest stop for the souls on their way to heaven. And so November 2nd, 1st and 2nd is when that takes place. Today, 20th century, I should say, the Day of the Dead in many towns throughout Mexico, especially in areas where the indigenous populations are still strong, they celebrate Day of the Dead in two main ways. One of them is the public, which takes place overnight at the cemetery. It's a very beautiful thing to see a small town empty out and inhabit the cemetery, which is usually not too far away. And they wait overnight, and they go to the same place because they're going to the grave sites of their families, where their families and ancestors have been buried for generations. And of course, the neighbors in the cemetery, they all know one another because every year they go through these rituals. Older people go there and they get caught up on their doings in life and what their children are up to. Kids go and they run around and play, and it really does become the town for that night. The cemetery becomes a living place, and it becomes the town. They light candles, they take food. There's certainly they have plenty of tequila and mezcal. I was trying to think of another way of saying it. They take plenty of tequila and mezcal to keep them warm through the night. They take guitars, they sing songs, they cry, they pray, and they laugh all night long. This beautiful photograph was taken in 1950 by Charles Townsend, and you can really get a sense here of how they're getting ready. They're hunkering down here, getting ready for the evening, for the night to fall. In the morning, they wake up at the cemetery, they clean up a little bit, and then they head home. And this is where they have the second part of the celebration, which is the private part. It's in the home. I say private because it's not everybody, but friends are invited, family stops by. They put food out on the altar as an ofrenda. And this is a very important point to understand, that an ofrenda is something that is placed. It's an offering that is placed on the Day of the Dead altar for the spirits, for the souls of the loved ones. And so if Uncle Tom really liked to smoke Marlboro cigarettes, well, you would put a pack of Marlboro cigarettes on there. If Aunt Minnie really liked a specific kind of dish that was served in that area, they would be sure to put that on there as well, to welcome them back home, just like you would welcome home anybody who's visiting you now. And then we're going to skip ahead now. So those are sort of the basic ideas of Day of the Dead, the celebration in Mexico, the way it is celebrated there. In the United States, it was the artist community. It was the cultural community that really embraced this concept of ancestry and family and celebration and folk art and fine art. And it was first, there were some people in Oakland. There was Yolanda Garfias Wu in Oakland was teaching about Day of the Dead in the public schools there, for, I would say, since the end of the 80s, beginning of the 70s. But it really didn't take off as a community celebration until 1974. And there's some fierce debate every now and then about, who did it first. But certainly in East LA, Self-Help Graphics is the one that is most documented, and they had their celebration in 1974. I have also heard that San Antonio in Texas, that there was a group there, not Guadalupe, I forget the name of it was a more of an arts and cultural community place, and that they also did it around that same time. In Chicago, Mexicans in Chicago are sort of a later arrival. Mexicans arrived in Chicago in the beginning of the 20th century. Certainly by the 1970s, Mexicans were a major group, major community within the city of Chicago. And in 1981, Clay Morrison organized the very first exhibition of Day of the Dead in Chicago. You can see the poster of it here on the screen. He organized it in a small gallery that's sort of in the downtown area. And just so you know, Clay curated exhibits. He was an artist and he was a collector of folk art from around the world. So he was the first one who really organized this in Chicago. Probably at that time, not many people outside the Mexican community knew about Day of the Dead. In 1987, as I mentioned earlier, the National Museum of Mexican Art hosted its first Day of the Dead exhibition. And this year, we have inaugurated our 35th Day of the Dead exhibition. And so as you can see, this was in the smaller gallery that used to be the museum in the opening days, the first days. You can see there's a plush rug on the gallery floor, and there were actually some windows there, things that we don't have anymore in our gallery spaces. But you get the sense of folk art that really came through. It was an artist, Hector Duarte, and Clay Morrison. The two of them together sort of organized the first exhibition. With that background now, I'm going to hopefully quickly go through the remaining slides that will illustrate installations, ofrendas, sometimes installations, site-specific pieces for certain, that were created by different artists around the country. And they have messages for and from the community. The National Museum of Mexican Art is a first voice institution. In other words, we believe that Mexican and Mexican-American artists should be on display at all museums across the country, and that their work should be in many collections. However, our exhibitions are first voice, and what that means to us is that nobody can tell your story as well as you can. No one can tell your story in the way that you would tell it. And so being a first voice institution, we are very proud to present the artists in our community and their messages and their ideas. This piece is from Esther Hernandez. She created it for the exhibit, and it's an ofrenda, or an offering, for her father, who worked in the San Joaquin Valley. Esther actually also worked with her family in picking vegetables and fruits in that area, in that land. And this piece is also about the pesticides that were sprayed in that region that caused many of the women to have birth defects and many other diseases and illnesses that came about because they were picking within the pesticide, picking in the fields that had pesticide on them. Esther created this ofrenda for her father. You can see some of the elements on the ground, and you can see the circle with the sand, and the cross is pretty traditional in Native American communities. So by the 80s, many in the Chicano movement had embraced the native indigenous ideas, and certainly their care for the land and the environment. Marco Raya created this piece. Marcos is an artist who came from Mexico. He came from Irapuato when he was a young man. And like many other immigrants who arrived in Chicago throughout the many years, they found life in the streets challenging. Marcos made this piece for people that he knew, people that he drank with in the alleys and the streets of Chicago. These are individuals who died from cirrhosis of the liver, or who died just from over drinking. He knew them by name. That was the thing that really struck me, was he knew all these individuals by name, and he drank with them. And he had his own demons to deal with. But this really does speak to the idea of an immigrant group that migrates into a city. City living is very different than working in the fields and living in the fields. And this is definitely one of the dangers of moving into an urban area. When Cesar Chavez died a couple of years later, we had the union farm workers create an ofrenda. What I loved about this is that as I saw them coming in, it was clear that none of them were artists. None of them were practicing artists or identified in that way. And when you have a group of farm workers coming in to create an artistic representation, it's all about the pride and what they're trying to convey. It comes through very clearly. I must say that I still to this day enjoy having non-artists from the community come into the gallery and create something. It's a little bit more work. It's a little more challenging, but it's just so wonderful to see, because they are claiming the space in the museum gallery, and the museum gallery becomes a reflection of who they are. It becomes a mirror of those individuals. Again, it is a bit of a challenge. It takes more work. They don't always give you the exact number of risers that they may need, or they don't give you the exact paint chip color that they want the wall. But they'll eventually explain it and get it done with the help of the museum preparators and installation crew. Jose Barrera was a teacher at a high school, and he lived and worked in the little village neighborhood that was a very gang-ridden neighborhood. In the 90s, he created this installation piece for Day of the Dead that really was his way, an educator in the community, to sort of warn against the dangers of gang violence. You can see also in the background on the right-hand side, there's another piece that also deals with gang colors and gang violence. End of the 90s was a very troublesome time for gangs in Chicago. And in the back on the left-hand side, you can see the community ofrenda. It's where visitors who go through the galleries can write the name of somebody who has passed away on a little decorative piece of paper and attach it to that sort of structure that we have on the walls. Artists who have participated: Kathy Vargas, Javier Chavira. Kathy is from Texas. Javier is from Aurora, Illinois. And these pieces, the one on the left by Kathy is photographs of her mother as she was passing. And the photographs, it's a beautiful story. I won't go into it now, but Kathy Vargas really, as a photographer, came to terms with her mother's passing through a lens. She explains how for photographers, life through the lens is what makes sense. And so that was a beautiful installation. Again, this is not about Day of the Dead, but it is about life and death and passing. The piece on the right by Javier is for people who passed away crossing the border. He has a bowl of water at the bottom because oftentimes they die from heat and from lack of water. But these two pieces I love because as our community comes and visits the exhibition and goes through it, they may not know a whole lot about contemporary art, but by the time they get to the end of the exhibit and they see these pieces in the context of Day of the Dead, they understand the artwork. They understand what the artist is saying. If this work of art was in another exhibition and someone from the community went up to it and saw it, they might not necessarily understand the work of art. I know my mother used to go to the exhibits, and a very contemporary work of art suddenly became something that she understood well because she saw it in the context of the exhibition. This was another incredible installation. It was actually done by a school. It's Talcott Fine Arts Academy is a Chicago public school. Many of the parents crossed the border themselves, and so they worked with an art teacher, and they had all kinds of meetings and discussions. And the beautiful thing was that in preparing to create this piece, this installation, the site-specific piece, the children heard a lot of stories from their parents and their aunts and their uncles about crossing the desert and risking their life to find a better life. And it was probably the first time a lot of those children heard those stories. They created this piece, and in the background, you can see they look like skulls. It's supposed to represent a zompantli. Zompantli is a skull rack that was a part of the Aztec architecture and the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan. But the skull rack is created from plastic milk jugs. Again, the idea of water. Oftentimes, people are found in the desert along the border with an empty gallon of milk because they filled it up with water and believed that 1 gallon of water would be enough to get them through through crossing the desert. Unfortunately, it's not enough water. And so they use the milk jug not only as a symbol of the water that people try crossing with, but also of the ancient Mesoamerican zompantli skull rack. In 2007, Big Picture High School, another Chicago public school, that year saw more shootings in the city of Chicago and deaths of students and children in the city. So Big Picture High School created this installation. So they're tiny, small ofrendas that are on the chalk ledge and on the school desks. And it was obviously a very moving thing to stand in front of this and see the photos and see the names of all the children that were killed that summer. Sadly enough, we have certainly broken that record by now. So obviously the main ideas that I'm trying to convey also is that we work often with school communities. Nani Chacon is an artist, a muralist from Albuquerque, New Mexico. She is half native, half Chicana, and she created an installation for the 8 women who are unidentified still to this day, indigenous women that were found in the desert in New Mexico. She created the butterflies and painted those ribbons on the wall. So the beautiful thing about this piece is that it really connects us with our communities in other parts, right? So in the Southwest, who are indigenous, but who are also facing many of the same challenges that other communities face along the border region. In 2017, was that when it was? I don't see the year on here. It's probably 2017, I'm guessing. 2016, there it is. There was a terrible shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. We went down there and found an artist, Wanda, to come up. Wanda brought up pieces of what was used in the sort of the makeshift altars that go up at sites of tragedy. You know, so when something happens, people go and they leave teddy bears or candles or flowers and balloons. Wanda brought those two flags that were a part of this. If in case you don't recall, the Pulse nightclub was LGBTQ nightclub where somebody went in the evening and just shot so many people. It was primarily a Latino LGBTQ nightclub, so it wasn't only against the LGBTQ community, but also against the Latino community. On the photo on the left, we had a Black Lives Matter installation. They came in and put this installation up for individuals who had been killed that year by police, and the contradictory or the strange thing, you know, the Day of the Dead is as strange as life is. In the background, you see an ofrenda that is for Officer Solorio. Officer Solorio, it was a police officer in Chicago from our community who defended our community, who was killed that year. We had the Chicago Police Department and family of his create this altar to him. So in that photograph you're looking at on the left, in the distance is an ofrenda for a Chicago police officer from the community. And on the left-hand side on yellow is Black Lives Matter. So life is complicated and confusing and is not always neatly put into little boxes. And the Day of the Dead exhibit really reflects that. It's sometimes it seems to contradict itself, but if you think about it, it reflects the way things are in life. 2018 was the Parkland shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School. I went down to Stoneman Douglas. We met with some of the parents, and Manuel and Patricia were the parents of Joaquin. They both came up from Parkland to work on this ofrenda installation. Obviously, one of the big messages in it is it's an anti-gun, handgun message, which is what really emerged from that shooting in 2018. On the left-hand side on the platform are all of the sports jerseys and hats that belonged to Joaquin. And on the right-hand side is a sculpture that was called The Last Shooting. It's a bronze sculpture of a small child under a desk, which is what they tell them to do in case they hear shots in the school. Again, absurdity, right? It's people from other countries come and see this and really they scratch their heads, you know, wondering how is it that you teach children to hide from a shooter, an active shooter under a desk. These installations, I hope that you're realizing that and seeing that they're real, they're people, they're families, they're communities. It's not artifice. It's not artist's imagination. It is a reality that we live with. In 2019, we focused on the Costa Chica, which is the Afro-Mexicano or African descent part of Mexico. There are Afro-Mexicans throughout Mexico, but in the Costa Chica, which is near Acapulco, it's near Acapulco. It shares a border with Guerrero and with Oaxaca. And we went down there to see how they celebrate in that region. And one of the unique celebrations to Day of the Dead is this whole dance. It's called the Dance of the Devils, Danza de los Diablos. And we brought up costumes, and we had the music playing and photography. And I put this here because I've got to tell you that pieces like this, or the idea of the African presence in Mexico, is still a challenge for many Mexicans to understand. It's a whole other topic that I don't want to get sidetracked, but just know that in Mexico, only recently have people of African descent been recognized. Before that, Mexicans were thought to be only a cross between Spanish and indigenous people. Now I think it's coming out that no, the third root, la tercera raíz in Mexico, is from Africa. And Africans were basically in all parts of Mexico, wherever there was an hacienda, wherever there was a mine, or wherever there was a city. So those of you who are familiar with Mexico know that that's pretty much all of Mexico: haciendas, mines, and cities. Anyhow, this is also a way in which we challenge our community and educate our community to understand our own history a little bit better. Last year, Salvador Jimenez used the Trees of Life tradition from Mexico, which are ceramic sort of candelabras that usually display Adam and Eve, or usually display different aspects of Mexican culture. Salvador Jimenez created these ceramic trees of life, but he focused on the air contamination that is happening in the little village neighborhood not far from the museum. And so these are about the environment. Hector Duarte created a piece that's on the right-hand side that was dedicated to two gentlemen who were murdered in 2020, early on in 2020. Homero and the other person's name escapes me right now. They were murdered because their job was to keep safe the forest where the monarch butterfly goes in the state of Michoacan. And so they were basically environmentalists who were protecting the forest, and it was the lumber industry who sent somebody in to kill these two guardians of the forest and of the monarch butterflies. So this is a beautiful homage. What doesn't come through, by the way, in this is Hector put in sort of fluorescent lighting, and this whole space really glows. It really is a very popular piece, and really it has a whole mystical feel about it that does not come through clearly in the photograph. We're getting near the end here. So this is this year. This year we invited Alejandro Garcia Nelo. He is from Valle de Bravo in the state of Mexico. And he is an incredible artist who does contemporary installations using very traditional media. What you are looking at is, if we were to list out the media, it would be fabric, and then it would be cardboard and butcher paper. For the most part, what you're looking at is hours and hours of somebody taking wheat paste and butcher paper and cardboard to create the hearts and the skulls. And then what he wanted us to do was, a month before the opening, we asked our public online to please upload photographs of people who passed away in the last 2 years of COVID. We received over 200 photographs, and I've got to tell you, it was heartbreaking to print them out and place them, because as fun and exciting as it is to help create a piece like this, the reality of it hits you when you're placing 200 photographs on the altar. And I've got to tell you that this exhibit is open now, and families have been coming in, especially on weekends, families of those individuals who are on there. They look for the photograph of their loved one. And you know, there's a lot of mourning that is happening across the country, but also in this gallery. And Day of the Dead is one of those things I think that truly helps people grieve and mourn the loss of somebody that they love, because it's a way of sharing their stories. The other thing I want to say is that this is a memorial as well. And I know Chicago and many other cities are struggling with their memorials, their cast bronze memorials of individuals. This is an ephemeral memorial, and I feel that this is the way memorials should be created in the future, not necessarily focused on one individual, but rather groups of people and movements of a community. Last two images I'm showing you here. This is also in this year's exhibit. The one I just showed you, the memorial, is back over here near the entrance. The one here is an ofrenda from Yucatan. It's a Mayan ofrenda. One of the artists came from Yucatan and created it. And of course, here we have Vanessa Guillen in the center. It's a portrait of Vanessa, who was murdered in 2020. She's certainly been in the news and is becoming an icon. Her image is becoming an icon within the Mexican-American community, as somebody who served and gave her life needlessly at Fort Hood. And what I want to point out, though, and this is how we're going to sort of begin to end this presentation, the ofrenda on the right is to Adam Toledo. Adam Toledo was recently killed by a Chicago police officer at 1 o'clock in the morning. The police officer was chasing him. Adam was a 13-year-old boy. He was part of a gang, but he was a boy. And so this I am putting in here because it's important to understand that community does not always think the same way. Community is oftentimes divided. Sometimes there's more than 2 or 3 points of view. And it's a challenge for institutions and museums like ours to represent the community when you realize that not everyone thinks the same. So we have gotten a few comments about this ofrenda that is devoted to a young boy. But if you notice, we're remembering his life. We're not focusing on his death or I should say in how he died. But it can be a controversial piece. And then the last piece I want to leave you with here, this is also in the current exhibition. Our teenagers from Yollocalli Arts Reach, they are an after-school group that has been around for 20 years. Yollocalli Arts Reach, please look them up. They do incredible work, and many of their alumni are now artists and curators and people that are working in the arts. And I love the fact that we've been around so long that some of those young kids now have work within the cultural landscape. The piece, though, represents completely last year. This piece was installed for last year's exhibition. We left it up for this year's exhibition. If you want to know what's on the minds of a teenager in the world today, this installation certainly gives you some idea. I have one photo of it up close, but as you'll see, it's not the best photo because the photographer left this in here. I could not find another photo of it, but this represents our young people, and sometimes what they think and what they believe might be pushing back on a lot of our current thoughts, but it's important to include the teenagers in this exhibition. It's important that our walls also reflect the young people, even though we may have other opinions, but the day that we don't incorporate or include their views is pretty much the day that we sort of set the clock for the end of the work that we do. It's hard to be relevant if you're not going to embrace the views of young people, the next generation. And with that, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Did I stop sharing the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
David?
Yes. Let's go to the audience and open it up to everyone. Actually, I will for questions. Katie?
Yeah. So I just want to start out with a comment that Marianela de la Hoz wrote in the chat. It says, gracias, Cesáreo, sorry. So moving and marvelous. Art is meant to touch souls, and all of these installations are incredible, strong, and beautiful. Devastating, and at the same time bringing truth and consciousness to us all. I just thought that was such a beautiful way of communicating how we all probably feel. So I had some questions. Are artists and community members, do they request to participate, or are they invited to participate?
So the Day of the Dead is a unique exhibit, meaning it's not curated in the same manner as another exhibit would. You know, the usual exhibition checklist and the registration, the registrar's needs and the insurance and all that. It's a little bit different. We try to control it as much as we can, but I think we've learned that for it to be relevant, we need to sort of let go of the reins a little bit. So to best answer your question is this. I would say a third of the altars and ofrendas and the artwork is brought to us, or they're from proposals that people bring or send. A third are pieces that are selected while the curator goes out to California or different towns in Mexico and is looking for pieces. And then another third is definitely from the permanent collection. So we do look for some, others do come our way, and some of it we've had for a while. And I've got to tell you, this happens almost every year. Somebody important in the community passes away like 3 weeks before the opening. And what are you going to do? Are you going to say, oh, sorry, they missed the deadline, we couldn't fit them in? Or do you do your best to try to include them in some way? The answer is the second. We have oftentimes stayed up late, put in the extra hours because we had to sort of make a little bit of extra room for somebody who just passed away who needed to be honored. If we didn't put them in there, trust me, somebody from our community on opening night would say, and how about so-and-so? How could you not have something for her or him? And honestly, like I mentioned before, this is more than just an art exhibition. It truly is. It's an expression and a celebration of life through the lens or perspective of death. And so we have to sometimes bend or break some of our museum rules of curating and installing and including works of art.
So can you elaborate a little bit about what role the museum does play in defining this exhibition? Like, does it set the theme, or how do you go about doing that?
Oftentimes, the themes, the internal sub-themes seem to emerge on their own. I really think that if you are in tune with your artists, you will see work in their studios that have the same thread running through it. So there was a couple of years there, and this may not be exactly for Day of the Dead, but there were a few years there where I would do studio visits, and every artist was working on something about gentrification. So it was clear that was something that was emerging in the artist community. The other thing is this: that same year, you could not go into a church or a cafe or a bar in the Pilsen neighborhood and not hear people talking about gentrification. So I do feel that the artists, the community artists really do reflect the community well. And if you pay attention to what they're up to, you'll get a really good sense of where the community's at. Not always, but oftentimes, yeah.
So Sharon Beckus is asking, how has the exhibition changed in the last 5 years? She says it seems very political now to her. How about actors who have died to honor as well?
Sure. No, so the pieces I selected for this for this presentation definitely were the ones that were a little bit more on the political side. But we have we always bring in people from Mexico to do the most traditional ofrendas from their region. And what I love is we've documented them all. We will be coming out with a catalog at some point where you will see simple traditional ofrendas from the mountain towns, from the desert towns, from the ocean towns, and you will see how they're all different, how they're all unique in their own regional sort of celebration. The other thing that is a continuum is the folk art. One of the differences, though, from past years to now is folk artists or artesanos in Mexico are no longer, for the most part, they're no longer creating what I would call museum spectacular works because there's no one to buy them. When I would go to Mexico in the 80s and I would go into an artisan's home, they would take me to the back to show me their spectacular works where they were experimenting with sizes and different materials, and they were incredible pieces. And we used to purchase them and ship them up to Chicago. And now those are the ones we display. Today, if you go to the artisans' studios, and they usually work out of their homes, you don't see many museum pieces anymore because the market is not there. And so now what they're creating in a lot of these towns in Mexico are smaller pieces that tourists can afford and that they can pack in their suitcase and take home with them. So I think one of the biggest changes, to answer the question, one of the biggest changes I have seen over the past 30 years is in the folk art. It's a sad change because it means that they're not experimenting and pushing themselves the way they used to, but rather they're creating what they know how to make and what they know will sell to a tourist market. And that's a little sad. That's and then of course the other thing is, people say, well, why don't you put in a petition, or why don't you commission a work? The difficulty with that is that oftentimes if you commission an artisan and then you go back 4 months later, you may be surprised as to what they made. It may not be exactly what you were hoping for. And so I guess that the creative edge there can sometimes bite you the wrong way. But that would be one of the biggest differences. There's one more big difference. I'm sorry, I'll throw this one out there too. There are many, many more women who are in the arts actively creating and pursuing their career. And I know that in the 90s, we used to always look for women because men used to have the work all the time, and the women, it was like, well, we need to include more women, and we would go looking for the artwork. Now that's not even on my mind anymore. Now some exhibits I will get more proposals from women artists than from men, and so that's really less of a concern. So I think that's a positive change in the last 30 years.
So you had said in the beginning that through this exhibition, you use artwork to teach about the culture and the history. And so guests that come to the museum may not know a lot about the art, but by the end, they can understand the art through the culture and the history. My question to you is, the museum text that's on the wall, because in your presentation, I gained an awful lot of information about the history and interpreting what I was seeing. So is there a lot of that happening in the museum text that's on the wall, or how do you go about doing that?
The simple answer is yes. And I'm smiling because I got out of a meeting yesterday where other people in other departments in the museum that are involved with the exhibitions mentioned that maybe we're starting to put too much information on the walls. And I was surprised. And then I asked around, and it seems like other people are also thinking that maybe we are putting too much. I don't know. I don't know how to do that. But yes, if you went this year and in past years, you would see, we call them chats. So there'll be the regular label, and then there'll be a chat that will explain a little bit about perhaps the artist and the artist's inspiration, but then also about the subject. Who was this person? What did this person mean to the community? And, you know, why is there ofrenda in the museum? One of the solutions that came up was the QR barcodes. Maybe we should put all that information on a QR barcode, and then people can look at it if they want to. My concern is that when people are in a gallery in a museum, do I really want to encourage them to take their phone out? I kind of feel that if their phone stays in their pocket throughout the whole museum visit, we succeeded. We succeeded. And so putting QR barcodes, I'm not sure that's exactly the answer. Maybe I'm just old, but it seems as though a lot of people are thinking that we should cut down on the text and put up QR barcodes. Last thing I'll say about that is we have the unique problem of that we have twice as many words on our walls than most museums, right? So we have it in English, and then we have it in Spanish. And if you've worked with any kind of Spanish translation, Spanish is about 1.5 times longer to explain the same thing than English is. And so there we are putting 2 tabloid size labels on the wall. And then, you know, I get the person who's tapping me on the shoulder saying, the font is too small, I can't read it. So these are our issues. I hope that we still provide that information, because I feel that we have to, even though people don't read, we still have to provide it. It's just a matter of how. And I'm in the minority, but you know, who knows? If any of you visit our museum in the future, you may see a lot of QR barcodes everywhere.
So Carolyn Dahl asks, this sort of leads into that question. Are you creating some sort of a catalog for these exhibitions? And if so, is there a link that's available for that? Because that kind of would be a place where some of that kind of information would be provided.
Yeah, you know, we had an incredible catalog for Day of the Dead that was done in 1992 or 93. And I used to go to bookstores in Oaxaca, Mexico, and I would see our catalogs there. And then I'd go to other places and see it there. So they were getting around. That was because, don't forget that the founders were educators, and catalogs and books were very important. And then I'm going to say around 2000, 2002, we sort of slowed down and stopped making as many catalogs as we were. And I kind of blame it on the internet and just even the cost of printing. We are now in a place, though, where we've been hearing time and again, why don't you have a catalog of your collection? Why don't you have a catalog of this exhibition? So I am very confident that within the next 3 years, we will be coming out with a few major catalogs. I hope that we do a Day of the Dead, because we have 30 years of transparencies and documentation and incredible people who could write small paragraphs to accompany each one. So I really do want to see that happen. But right now, we're just starting that conversation again, thank goodness.
So how do you think the annual exhibition benefits local artists?
So when we were the Mexican Fine Arts Center Museum when I first worked there. And then in 2006, we became the National Museum of Mexican Art, which was a wonderful, it sort of reflected what we had been doing already. So it wasn't a name change and then change the identity. Our identity had changed. And so the name then fit what we were doing already. One of the comments I received immediately was from a few local artists who said, oh, so now that you're national, I guess we're out of the picture. So we, at that point, we dedicated one of the smaller galleries to local artists only. That is their space. And there's a line waiting for exhibits to get in there. The Day of the Dead exhibit really allows many of our local artists to participate in a museum exhibit. And I've got to tell you, when the first time an artist gets a loan agreement, it's like, wow, there's so many questions on here. How does it? So what I'm saying is that from step one to the return of the piece, wrapped up beautifully and placed in a nice container, they kind of learn some of the ropes that maybe they didn't learn in art school. And oftentimes our registrar, Raquel Aguinaga, she will take an artist aside and she will say, listen, let me tell you, the next time you're in a show, you need to think about how they're going to hang it, because we had to come up with a way of hanging it safely, because you didn't think about it. And it's something that you really need to think about. Don't just make the piece, be inspired, and then not think about how it's going to hang on a wall. So all of our team, the preparator, the registrar, we work with the local artists. Oftentimes for the first time, they kind of learn some of the important tricks. So that's how it benefits them, but then it also gives them great exposure. Pre-pandemic, we would get 85,000 plus visitors for this one exhibit every single year. And so many of the artists, I think for the first time, get that kind of exposure, and they are so grateful. And it's not just the local ones. It's also, I just received a thank you email from an artist down in Texas who said, thank you so much. People have been sharing my painting that's hanging up in your museum on social media like crazy, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. So, when a museum walks hand in hand, step by step with artists, it's a great relationship for both museum and the artists.
So Jessica Langworthy said, thank you so much for sharing. She truly enjoyed the lecture, and she loves that you mentioned a group of general education teachers starting a community change or shift for representation. And as a future general education teacher herself, that's inspiring. So I want to ask you has the annual exhibition of works of art surrounding this topic, has that increased the number of visitors of the population that that originally generated from, to become more involved in the museum and attend more, and so for the other exhibitions that actually are presented there also?
Yes, for the two-part question, I would just say very quickly, our gift shop has sales out the roof during, this is pre-pandemic, right? Right now everything's a little bit weird. They make enough money to support 3 full-time employees, the salaries and insurance and all that, with the gift shop sales every year during Day of the Dead. It's our golden goose. And for a museum that has free admittance, that earned income is very important. That earned income allows us to keep our doors open free the rest of the year, or throughout the year. The other thing I would say is that if you hadn't noticed, and I bet you have, Day of the Dead is really growing in popularity since the movie Coco. So I think Disney has really propelled and sort of taught people that Day of the Dead is not a satanic, scary, evil thing, but rather a celebration of life. Even though it has the word dead in there, it's a celebration of life, and Disney has really sort of given it a big boost. Our big concern now, though, is that in marketing Day of the Dead, whether it's at Target or Michael's craft store or your local grocery store, that it might start to lose some of the thing that makes it most important and separates it from Halloween, which is the spirituality, the idea of hanging on to and memorializing somebody needs to be at the heart of Day of the Dead. It cannot just turn into a sugar skull festival where people wear makeup and they dance around to mariachi music. It can't just be that. It must be about remembering the dead, keeping their memories alive, and a spiritual component, not religious, not, just a spirit. I've seen people now who make ofrendas, who make little altars for their pets, which I think is wonderful. It really helps you mourn. It helps you keep stories alive. And that is the strength of Day of the Dead. So hopefully the marketing, the mass marketing that's starting to happen won't shift that understanding of it.
Fingers crossed on that one, but we see what happens in our country when things become commercialized, right? Yeah. Halloween is a perfect example. I have another question here because you had shown the ofrenda for the police officer and then the ofrenda for the Black Lives Matter, sort of a juxtaposition. So how does the museum decide which controversial works to include or exclude? And what is the decision-making process for where to place them in the exhibition with a mind towards how the visitor is going to perceive it?
Yeah. So that, I've got to say, is the difficult job of curating. So many times people think that a curator, has like this great story already figured out. Really what it comes down to is listening and really having people whose opinions you trust, who are in the community, not in the arts world. So whether it's doctors or police officers or priests or people that work at schools, a lot of educators, I listen to a lot of educators because they hear what their students are saying. It's a matter of trying to listen through all the noise and hear the voice of the community. And then that kind of gives you a sense of what we should do. And it's not always a simple or an easy decision. The other thing that you mentioned is placement. Obviously, I'm thinking of the tour guides as they go through the exhibit and how each piece adds a new piece of the puzzle. And so I like to place the works of art so that there's more that is revealed as you turn the corner or as you go down into the next room. And so for me, it's about that photograph had them juxtaposed because of the angle of the photographer. But for the most part, I wouldn't put two side by side that maybe had competing ideas or concepts.
So we have a hand raised. B. Barraza, would you like to ask your question? You're muted still.
I don't think, there I can. Sorry. I'm really, Cesáreo, I loved your comments about, this confusion and I'm going to use the term cultural, appropriation. I know that's an imperfect term, and sometimes I really regret having to use it, but you talked about that with, and it's the same with Cinco de Mayo, which has become, a celebration in the United States to eat Mexican food and drink a lot of beer. It's been really commercialized. And I do worry about, not in this, I love American Halloween. I mean,
Mhm.
and I want to keep it separate from my celebration and my ofrenda for familia from Halloween. I want Dia de los Muertos separate. And I'm wondering, and Coco, to your point, really was a game changer.
Mhm.
Everyone loved that film. And I thought they did a fabulous job of keeping some of the spirituality but really focusing on family and family devotion. But I'd like to hear more about what you think about what's going to, I think the museum is doing a fabulous job of really focusing on the true cultural meaning and the community social connections. But I just wanted to hear more about what you
Sure.
think about this appropriation.
Sure. It's so you know, it's so two things. One is the strength of Day of the Dead is it is a malleable tradition. It's a malleable celebration. People can make it their own, and it depends on where you're from, right? Somebody in Minnesota might do a different kind of celebration than somebody in San Antonio or somebody in California or somewhere in Mexico. And so the fact that you can make it your own adds to this whole beauty of it. It's not like adopting something and then you have to stick it into your life. It should reflect your life from the get-go. So that's the beautiful thing about Day of the Dead, is that it is malleable. The scary thing, and you hit it right on the head, Coco actually did a very good job with the spirituality and a lot of those concepts. But of course, they had some creative license in there. And my fear was, man, I hope people don't go away thinking that that's part of Day of the Dead. Very enjoyable, very creative, but it was some creative license. So the fear for me is, and it's been mentioned already, which is the marketing of it. When you market, when corporate America markets something, they have to strip it down so that it's more palatable for a broader audience. And in that stripping it down, taking things out of it, they end up by changing it and kind of watering it down. It's like a soup that gets watered down so that it can feed more people. I question the economic goals behind doing something like that. And I just hope that the museum and other cultural centers across the US, in California or in New Mexico or Texas, that we can at least provide a more realistic, authentic celebration and counterbalance maybe some of the marketing that's happening. I've seen so many sugar skull tattoos and breweries using it on their beers, and it's enjoyable to see, but I don't want it to just become that. It has to be about the people that you love, the people that are no longer with you, but who are still an important part of your family. That's who you need to think about when you think about Day of the Dead, not Coco, not Sugar Skulls. You need to think about those people that you love who are no longer with you at the Thanksgiving table. And that's the essence and the strength of Day of the Dead. Yeah.
And Teresa adds a comment to that. She says there's another animated film called The Book of Life that was made in 2014 by a guy from San Diego, and it's really good, but it's not as popular as Coco. So
yes, I've heard of it. We saw it. I saw it with my family. I try to see all things Day of the Dead just to stay on top of what's being said. But you are right. The Book of the Dead is actually very good also. There are good animations and movies and things out there that our children can consume, our grandchildren can consume, and still understand it. Right? It's not too far off the beaten path. Yeah.
So I have another question, because I'm a teacher, and so I'm constantly making connections to things, and as a docent, that's kind of how I approach looking at our works of art also. So I see a lot of connections between cultures with this reverence for the spiritual connection or component to it, and honoring our ancestors. And we see that obviously in lots of movies also. But has your museum ever talked about, as part of your exhibition, maybe including components of other cultures that have that same type of connection or reverence and cycle of life type theme?
So yes, we have on a few occasions. So the exhibit is Day of the Dead, so we want to remain focused on that. But we have in the past, we included the Irish American Heritage Center from Chicago, did a small display case on their pre-Christian ideas of life and death. And the Japanese American Center, also in the Chicagoland area. And they created a Japanese sort of a candle installation the year that there was a tsunami that killed many Japanese. So it was something that was topical. It was, it was in the news. People walked in already with the knowledge of this tragedy. And then to sort of see the Japanese installation, it was beautiful because it was a juxtaposition, but at the same time, it was like a solidarity. It was an understanding and a ritual that really shared a lot of, they had a lot in common. So if the occasion arises, we could do that, but we've got to be careful because we want to show it in contrast, but in solidarity at the same time. It has to have that. It can't just be one or the other. And it's happened to me quite a few times where there's an exhibition, Day of the Dead or another exhibit, and somebody will come up to me after they've gone through the exhibit and they say, hey, my parents were from Northern Italy and we do the exact same thing that you guys do that I saw in the exhibit. And it's the same thing, except it's totally different. And then, and I know what they mean by that. It's the same thing, but it's totally different. And then they enjoy explaining it to me. And that is the beauty of art and the humanities. And that's what we're all supposed to be doing, celebrating the differences only because we understand what we share, what we have in common. And I think that when people say that to me, I want to hug them and just say, yeah, you get it. You get it. That's exactly what it's about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure we are in time, David.
No, I was just going to say, I wanted to go back to an early comment, Cesáreo, that you made about the value of making mistakes. I'm a scientist, research scientist by training and career, and we learned the most by the work that didn't work. By understanding why things don't work and why, and expanded, then that always led to a solution and to new discoveries. So I think you're a great example of how taking risks, allowing yourself to make mistakes, owning up to the mistakes, and then adjusting accordingly is something we should all be looking for. That's just a powerful way to really learn ourselves from others.
The society we live in right now is so afraid of mistakes. And if you think about it, it's ridiculous. I mean, again, not to pick on politicians, but a politician that changes their mind, sometimes that's a good thing. It's not that you didn't know what you were doing. It's that you've grown as a human being and you've learned. Maybe you've seen or experienced something differently. So I'm all in favor of mistakes. And I've told my kids that since the beginning. Embrace your mistakes. As long as you learn from them, embrace them, to make them yours.
And so often what you discover along the way, as you think is a mistake, is in fact something you love to do. So it's a whole new, whether it's cooking or
Sure.
This is a great way maybe to sort of conclude your lecture. Thank you so much, Cesáreo. This has been just a really delightful, enlightening morning, and we're so grateful to have you here. We hope you'll come to San Diego and we can go through the galleries together.
I will not go to San Diego and not stop at the museum. How's that?
I have one more thing I want to put out there, because you were talking about all the text on the wall and the problem with that. One of the things that we've been talking about as a docent community is changing our approach and asking visitors questions. So it'd be more of a discovery type experience for the visitors, because it sounds like a lot of your visitors bring that context with them, as you were saying. So I'm wondering if you changed from being informative in your text on the wall to posing the strategic question here and there for people to access what they bring to it. And then your QR code could provide more factual information for them, or a catalog, is, whatever works. But anyway, I just thought I'd.
No, that's beautiful. That's wonderful. Our education department is really good at coming up with those questions, because I'm kind of stuck thinking about the museum visitor, and I've got my own, and they're thinking about, kindergarten educators or families, and so they have a wider net of questions. So I really trust them and love when they do that. But yeah, you're right. There's asking visitors question makes them look at the artwork closer. So that's without a doubt, that's a benefit. Yeah.
That's what we're all looking for, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Well, again, Katie, thank you so much. Thanks everyone who attended. Thank you, Cesáreo. And we hope you'll join us again in November for the next lecture. All right.
Thank you.
With that,
have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Adios.